Thank you very much for coming. This is the last of the lectures I've been giving over the last 3 years. That makes it sound like quite a lot of lectures, in fact only 9. And because it's the last one, I thought 2 things. I thought first of all I'll wear a suit and tie. And secondly, I will end with endings. And in fact, I was going to go to the first slide, but this slide, which isn't of my own devising, Richard did it, has satisfied a curiosity in me. How will Richard, who's our tech guy, illustrate something as abstract as endings in fiction? I think he's done it rather brilliantly. And actually, I hope it will turn out, surprisingly, quite appositely, surprisingly to me, a kiss. Think how many endings of television or film narratives end with a kiss, and how few novels do. Well, we're going to look maybe why that is, but also we will have one novel this evening which looks as though it's ending with a kiss, and justifying, therefore, that picture. My previous lecture in this series on historical fiction ended with this, which is an ending. It's the end of Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light, which is itself the end of her trilogy, a Thomas Cromwell trilogy, it's sometimes called, of Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies, and The Mirror and the Light. And I'm not going to read it out, actually. It's the only one I'm not going to read out, because I read it so effectively last time and talked so ruminatively and feelingly about it that I could never reproduce the inspiration of that moment. But it's a good place to start something on endings for me, because, of course, the force of Mantel's ending is that we always knew where we were headed. We always knew how this novel had to end. Everything in the novels is narrated from the point of view of Thomas Cromwell. He gets executed, the novel ends. And indeed, talking about her composition of the final volume, Hilary Mantel often humorously referred to the fact that she and we knew where we were going. The pressure upon her was to do justice, which I think she did in her final couple of pages, to the moment when the person through whose consciousness we're experiencing events dies. And there's a special pressure on an ending to a sequence of novels, what the French call a roman fleuve. The readers come a long, long way if they've read all the novels. Hilary Mantel, you'll have come through 1,932 pages to get to this. So she's got something to live up to. And we know what that's like. We know what it's like. I mean, I suppose the most famous, widely publicized modern example was the publication in 2007 of, yes, I'm going to mention it, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the 7th volume of that series, and the speculation about how that book, which was advertised years in advance as going to be the last one in the series, how it would end. I remember there was a Guardian article in which children were asked to predict how it would end. And all those with any nous went, Voldemort will die. Yes, in that unsentimental way of the child reader. And of course, they were right. They were right. He had to die. And of course, when he died, you saw in retrospect how he had to sort of kill himself, didn't he? Yes, because it was a children's novel. He sort of, I won't go into the details, but it's sort of, he does it to himself. But he had to go for the novels to end. And actually that business of readers speculating and wondering how a sequence of novels will end is replicated a great deal through popular culture, through television narrative. And you'll know that whenever there's a successful multi-part television narrative, the newspapers before the final series, if it's announced to be the final series, will run features on what's going to happen. And various people will guess, Happy Valley, how's it going to end? Tommy Lee Royce has to die. He kills himself. Funny that, same trick. And at the moment, they're all running features on how Succession is going to end. Surely Logan Roy can't live if the narrative is going to come to an ending. And I thought I'd start by looking at a couple of endings in fiction which feature novelists encountering the same sort of challenge, the challenge of a sequence of novels coming to an ending and leaving us at once satisfied, but also with the certainty that nothing else can follow. This is the ending of Edward St. Aubyn's semi-autobiographical, maybe even three-quarters autobiographical, maybe even 9/10 autobiographical sequence of novels, which are often called the Patrick Melrose novels. Began with Nevermind in 1992 and ended with At Last in 2011. And I think it's the most brilliant. I mean, if there's a genre called auto-fiction, which has emerged in the last 30 or 40 years in Europe, I think this is the most brilliant and certainly the most brilliantly well-written example. And this novel, this sequence of novels, recalled and turned into fiction all sorts of appalling events and experiences, and above all, his monstrous, Edward St. Aubyn's monstrous father, who raped him when he was a child and continued abusing him for years, and whose death is featured in the second volume, Bad News, but who, as it were, keeps coming back to life in the protagonist's memory through the following volumes. So here we are in the fifth book in the series. It's emphatically and sardonically entitled At Last. And the events, I mean, appropriately really, I guess, for a sequence of novels that has spanned 4 decades, the events of the last one are concentrated on one day, the day of his mother's funeral, Patrick's mother's funeral, his hopeless, complicit mother. And it begins with the funeral and ends with the news, or nearly ends with the news of a telephone call telling him that his father's venomous friend, Nicholas Pratt, who's a sort of sidekick monster to his father, a terrible person, a wonderful character for the reader, has suddenly died on his way home from the funeral. And it's a kind of comic release and tragicomic release. And at the end of the chapter, before the last chapter, Patrick's ex-wife Mary has invited him to supper with her and his 2 children, and he's declined. And she's told him he can always change his mind. One of his children, Thomas, says, "In fact, you should change your mind, because that's what it's for." And he says no. He goes off to his little Kensington flat in the attic of a block, and to sort of feel sorry for himself and maybe phone the attractive waitress in the restaurant at the end of the street. And then he changes his mind. Patrick slid back down in his chair and sprawled in front of the view. He noticed how his tears cooled as they ran down his cheeks. Washed eyes and a tired and empty feeling? Was that what other people meant by peaceful? There must be more to it than that, but he didn't claim to be an expert. He suddenly wanted to see his children, real children, not the ghosts of their ancestors' childhoods, real children with a reasonable chance of enjoying their lives. He picked up the phone and dialed Mary's number. He was going to change his mind. After all, that's what Thomas said it was for. So, good to end on a child's dry wit, but also ending with something signalled by that title. This is the end of a series of novels which has dramatised not just the protagonist's sufferings as a child, but his alcoholism, breakdown of his marriage, his drug addiction. Maybe now he's sort of coming out of it. But also, because it's autofiction, it's a sort of signal that there's a relationship between the writing of the novels and the author's own experience. Finally, he's stopped writing about himself. He's going to write about other things. Here's the end of another sequence of autobiographically based novels. In 2014, 16 and 18, Rachel Cusk published a sequence of 3 novels called Outline, Transit, and Kudos, all narrated by an unself-revealing character called Faye, who seems to have a lot in common with Rachel Cusk, and who spends her time listening to and reporting the self-absorbed monologues of the characters she meets. And actually, things happen to Faye, but you only find out about them implicitly or parenthetically. She has a husband, her marriage breaks up, she falls in love with somebody else, she marries again. But these things are just sort of mentioned in the margins. Most of the time, it's just the transcripts of what these, I have to say, extremely incautious people she meets say to her. So each of these gripping, actually, weirdly gripping, but entirely plotless novels could go on forever. So each has to be brought to an end. And this is the end of the final one, Kudos, the third and final one. And you'll notice something strange about it, which is the font. So all the novels are in a sans serif font. That means a font without the funny little curlicues at the foot and heads of the letters, which were thought for a long time to be the only things that make reading bearable on the eye. We're all used to sans serifs now because, of course, it's the emails are all sans serifs. And we're used to those funny names like Helvetica and Calibri and Grammond, aren't we? But anyway, this is one called Optima, which Cusk uses for all 3 of the novels. And it's as if, I suppose, graphically, it's indicating the unexpressiveness, the strange and unsettling neutrality of the narration. And what's happening in the third of the novels, Kudos, is that our narrator has travelled, who's a novelist, who lives in North London, has travelled to a literary conference in an unnamed Mediterranean country. There she listens to the soliloquies of fellow writers and journalists who are all pretty much unbearable egomaniacs. The men talk entirely about themselves. The women talk about the men. And Faye records it all. Near the end, she takes a break from the literary self-obsessions of her fellow conferencees and goes to the beach, the nearby beach, for a swim. And I don't quite understand why. Maybe it is actually a nudist beach, but all the people on the beach seem to be naked, and they almost all seem to be men. And Faye gets into a swimming costume and swims out to sea. And as she's swimming, she looks back to the shore and sees a huge burly man with a great curling black beard and a rounded stomach and thighs like hams, I quote, walk towards her, it appears. He's like some strange character out of pagan mythology. And this is the very end of the novel. He came to a halt just where the waves broke, and he stood there in his nakedness, like a deity, resplendent and grinning. Then he grasped his thick penis and began to urinate into the water. The flow came out so abundantly that it made a fat, glittering jet like a rope of gold he was casting into the sea. He looked at me with black eyes, full of malevolent delight, while the golden jet poured unceasingly forth from him until it seemed impossible that he could contain any more. The water bore me up, heaving, as if I lay on the breast of some sighing creature, while the man emptied himself into its depths. I looked into his cruel, merry eyes, and I waited for him to stop. Several of the reviews of this novel, of course, reviews can't give away the ending. This is why what we're doing is so much literary criticism. I always say to people the difference between reviewing and literary criticism is literary criticism talks about the endings. And so the reviewers couldn't do this, but several of them said, wait till you get to the end. It's weird. The narrator, as ever, is a sort of disembodied witness to what's going on. And the ending, for me, changed the way I thought I'd read what had already happened. The ending makes, I think, any reader consider how much of the trilogy that's preceded this passage is indeed about the more or less malevolent exercise of masculine power, as if she's alerting you to things which she made you not quite notice at the time, but now you do. And that's a fascinating thing about an ending of a novel, I think, whether good, bad, whether satisfactory or unsatisfactory. It so often changes what we've already read. It's worthwhile thinking, before I'm going to give some examples of that, and of the troubles that it has given novelists. But I think it's worthwhile thinking a little bit first about what an ending is. And I suppose this is one of my very, very favourites, endings in all the fiction I've read. And it's a kind of really useful epitome of an ending, because it's Franz Kafka's The Trial, and The Trial was an entirely unfinished novel. Kafka left it unfinished at his death. He left an assortment of unnumbered manuscripts in separate folders with chapter titles, but no numbers to indicate what order they'd go in, and indeed some chapters which he'd only just started and never finished, and which you don't get in the book. So it was still totally a work in progress, and indeed, as you might know, he left instructions for his literary executor, Max Brod, to destroy it, which Max Brod didn't do. Praise the Lord. So we have one of the greatest novels ever written, because Max Brod disobeyed the instructions in Kafka's will. And the final chapter, it looks like the final chapter was written quite early in the process of composition. So Kafka wrote the end before he'd wrote lots of bits near the beginning. And he entitled it Ender. And it's about a man, Joseph K., who's accused of a crime which is never made explicit for reasons he doesn't understand, by a bureaucracy he cannot penetrate. And near the end, what happens is that two men, very sinisterly, both wearing top hats, perhaps they're officials, they call for him at his house. He knows that he must accompany them. They walk him out of the town, into the countryside, and it becomes clear they're going to kill him. And you're going to indulge me because I'm reading it in English, but I have got perfunctory German. I'm going to read it in German as well because it's great in German. But the hands of one of the men, and this is the very, very end, but the hands of one of the men were already at Kay's throat, while the other thrust the knife deep into his heart and twisted it there twice. with failing eyes, Kay saw the two of them cheek by cheek, close in front of his face, watching the final act. Like a dog, he said. It was as if the shame of it would outlive him. Aber an Kays Gürtel legten sich die Hände des einen Herrn, während der andere das Messer ihm tief ins Herz stieß und zweimal dort drehte. Mit brechenden Augen sah noch K., wie die Herren nahe vor seinem Gesicht, Wange an Wange, aneinander gelehnt, die Entscheidung beobachteten. Wie ein Hund, sagte er. Es war, als sollte die Scham ihm überleben. Well, the novel may have been unfinished, but it's pretty ended, I would say. It's about as ended as an end can be. And brilliantly, not just, of course, with the protagonist's death, but his clinching perception that as a victim, it's actually his that's the shame. The mysterious bureaucracy's final triumph is to let him realize that he's to blame. So the ending, of course, matters very much to the reader. It's where the contract's fulfilled, promises are kept or not, questions answered. A botched ending can change what we thought of all that went before. Remember, I was trying to say that with respect to the Cusk ending. There's a great Philip Larkin poem, it's a very short one, called As Good as a Mile, about the experience of throwing an apple core into a waste paper basket and missing. Yes, the shied core misses. Failure spreading back up the arm. It's a fantastic Larkin phrase. And I think that can happen with narrative too. You can all probably think of your own examples of endings which, by disappointing, somehow made the experience, changed the experience you'd already had of what went before. And novelists very much don't want you to have that, that disappointment, and know very much that an ending has to fulfill what's already taken place. So I wanted to look now at 3 or 4 endings where the novelist, famous novelists, a famous book, changed their minds. And in the change of mind, let us see how an ending might have disappointed us. Okay, I know this is a rubbish picture, okay, but it's a rubbish picture of something very, very special. And if you were unlucky enough to be my students, you'd be having to guess it, and there'd be a Twix bar for the winner. It's actually a very unusual thing because it's a manuscript, it's owned by the British Library, of a page from a Jane Austen novel. We only have one manuscript, or several pages of it, of any of Jane Austen's completed fiction. And it's very telling. She wasn't fussed about preserving her manuscripts. It's very telling that the only reason we've got it is because it's a bit of a novel she didn't use. It's a bit of Persuasion. And it's the ending of Persuasion, the last 2 chapters, and it's an ending she changed her mind about. Now, in this ending, the manuscript ending, Admiral Croft invites our heroine, Anne Elliot, into his lodgings in Bath, supposedly to see his wife, with whom Anne's on friendly terms, but in fact, because he knows that Captain Wentworth, the man that Anne rejected 8 years before, the man she still loves, is there. And Admiral Croft manufactures this meeting and then leaves the two of them together. Captain Wentworth, nonplussed, tells Anne that Admiral Croft has told him that he thinks Anne is engaged to slimy, sinister Mr. Elliot, the heir of Kellynch Hall. And it gives him a chance to deny it vehemently, which he does. So we get this. He was a moment silent. She turned her eyes toward him for the first time since his re-entering the room. The punctuation, by the way, is exactly the punctuation Austen uses in manuscript. His colour was varying, and he was looking at her with all the power and keenness which she believed, that's her spelling, she found I before E except after C was not a rule that she was familiar with, which she believed no other eyes than his possessed. No truth in any such report, he repeated. No truth in any part of it? None. He had been standing by a chair, enjoying the relief, there's that spelling again, of leaning on it or playing with it. He now sat down, drew a little nearer to her, and looked with an expression which had something more than penetration in it, something softer. Her countenance did not discourage. It was a silent but a very powerful dialogue. On his side, supplication, on hers, acceptance. Still a little nearer, and a hand taken and pressed, and Anne, my own dear Anne, bursting forth in the fullness of exquisite feeling, and all suspense and indecision were over. They were reunited. They were restored to all that had been lost. She wrote after this, finish, July 18th, 1816. But thank goodness, she then had second thoughts after sleeping on it. And I think this is only an extract from a whole chapter that she completely scrapped. But we could spend plenty of time on why. Well, I mean, for a normal novelist, it'd be okay. But for Jane Austen, it's really not that good. And in particular, surely she saw the failure spreading up the arm, some really specific things wrong with it. So, for instance, as I've just described, it relies on a subterfuge by Admiral Croft, who is, if you've read the book, you'll know, the most honest and open character in world fiction. Suddenly he's become surreptitious and sly. It even involves, there's lots and lots of little things. The thing which tells me that it's all wrong is saying, Anne, my own dear Anne. Captain Wentworth only uses Anne's first name once in the whole novel. You know this, don't you? Only once. And that's in blind panic when Louisa Musgrove has precipitated herself off the cob at Lyme and is lying unconscious, perhaps dying. And somebody says, Anne can go and find a doctor, and he goes, no one better than Anne. Obviously, the only sensible person in Dorset. And he's right. But of course, in this scrapped ending, Austen makes him go, Anne, my own dear Anne. And it's all not good enough. She had second thoughts, and she produced something brilliant instead. And this is a bit of the ending that you'll be familiar with in a crowded room at the White Hart Inn in Bath. And it's important that it is crowded, that this is all going on while other people are idiotically talking all around. How appropriate, because it's a novel where the heroine is always surrounded, it seems, by other people talking idiotically. Anne is discussing in this room with Captain Harville, Captain Wentworth's friend, whether a man's or a woman's feelings are likely to last the longest, because they've recently heard that Captain Benwick, who was deep in mourning for the death of his fiancée, Captain Harville's sister, has now gone and got engaged to Louisa Musgrove. And as they talk, Captain Wentworth, about the retentiveness of, or otherwise, of feelings, Captain Wentworth sits writing at a desk nearby. At one electric moment, he drops his pen. As he rises to leave, he pushes a letter, evidently for Anne, towards her. And I didn't have room for the whole letter, but this is the end of it. For you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail to have understood my wishes? I had not waited even these 10 days could I have read your feelings, as I think you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. I'm every instant hearing something which overpowers me. You sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones of that voice when they would be lost on others. Too good, too excellent creature. You do us justice indeed. You do believe that there is true attachment and constancy among men. Believe it to be most fervent, most undeviating in FW. I must go, uncertain of my fate, but I shall return hither or follow your party as soon as possible. A word, a look will be enough to decide whether I enter your father's house this evening or never. And of course, how much better in its indirectness. He cannot speak to her. Of course, he cannot speak to her and say those easy things of the previous ending, the rejected ending. He has to write them, push them across the desk in all his uncertainty, the uncertainty about her feelings, which is so easily dispelled in the rejected ending, is still preserved here. And of course, it allows for the brilliant bit, which even TV can't get wrong, when she then goes out into the street and meets him with Charles Musgrove. And in this wonderful novel all about feelings between people, amongst others who understand nothing about what's going on, she's able to look at him. That's all she has to do, and he knows. Austen altered the how of her ending in this radical way, but of course, she was never in doubt, and I think the reader's never in doubt, about the where of the ending, where it was going to go. But later novelists will entertain doubts about that. Here is the ending of Charlotte Bronte's final novel, I think her best novel, Villette, but it's a funny sort of ending. So, very briefly, for those of you not familiar with it, Villette is a place, not a person. Villette is Brussels, where Charlotte Bronte herself had attended a pensionnat, a sort of girls' school. And that is the setting for a large part of the action of her novel. It's narrated in the first person by Lucy Snow, the heroine. And after many vicissitudes, at the end of the novel, she has finally found love with Monsieur Paul Emmanuel, her fellow teacher at the girls' school, a particularly spiky and irascible character. And he's got an inheritance. He's set up a new school for her in Villette, which she is now running, and they've declared their love to each other. But he's had to travel to Guadeloupe for 3 years on family business. And now, at the very end, he is returning to marry her. But it's Charlotte Bronte, I'm afraid. As he sails back, a tempest rages in the Atlantic. These are the last 4 paragraphs of the novel. There's nothing after this. That storm roared frenzied for 7 days. It did not cease till the Atlantic was strewn with wrecks. It did not lull till the deeps had gorged their full of sustenance. Not till the destroying angel of tempest had achieved his perfect work would he fold the wings whose waft was thunder, the tremor of whose plumes was storm. Pretty high rhetoric here. Peace, be still, oh, 1,000 weepers, praying in agony on waiting shores. Listen for that voice, but it was not uttered till, when the hush came, some could not feel it, till when the sun returned, his light was night to some. Here pause at once, there is enough said. Trouble no quiet, kind heart, leave sunny imaginations hope. Let it be theirs to conceive the delight of joy born again, fresh out of great terror, the rapture of rescue from peril, the wondrous reprieve from dread, the fruition of return. Let them picture union and a happy succeeding life. I think that paragraph says, you want a happy ending? Oh, dream on. But if you like, Madame Beck prospered all the days of her life. So did Père Silas. Madame Valravon fulfilled her 90th year before she died. Farewell. The three characters at the end, by the way, and who prosper and live long and sort of comfortable lives, are the three characters who have conspired through the novel to thwart Lucy's relationship with Paul Emmanuel. Okay, they do fine. But you might say, I mean, why write it like that? Why write it like that? And as in any seminar group, if you're teaching this, one blessedly ingenuous reader will, to the relief of everybody else, actually ask the question everybody's thinking of. Has he drowned? We have a bit of information about this, which may or may not be reliable. I mean, I think the information is reliable, but it may not be a reliable guide to Bronte's intentions. Bronte's friend, Elizabeth Gaskell, in her life of Charlotte Bronte, her posthumous life of Charlotte Bronte, recalled the novelist, who was a great, great friend of hers, telling her that she'd made the ending of Villette uncertain to placate her father, the Reverend Patrick Bronte. I'm quoting from Gaskell here. Mr. Bronte was anxious that Villette should end well, as he disliked novels which left a melancholy impression upon the mind. Just like my dad. So, by Gaskell's account, having decided that Paul Emmanuel would die at sea, all that Charlotte Bronte could do, says Gaskell, again I quote her words, is, in compliance with her father's wish, was so to veil the fate in oracular words as to leave it to the character and discernment of her readers to interpret her meaning. It's a wonderful notion. She wrote an ending which Patrick Bronte thought was happy, but everybody else would realise was unhappy. But it's since felt, I think, to many readers. I mean, you'll have to decide. You have to read, I'm afraid, the whole of Villette to decide this, not just the ending. And if you haven't ever done that, it's worth it. It really, really is. But you might feel, like many readers have felt, a kind of failure of nerve here. Do we believe the story about her dad? Or is this a sort of final, un-Bronte-like bending to the expectations of Victorian readers? How many great Victorian novels that aren't written by Thomas Hardy do have unhappy endings? Anyway, an ending has to work within convention, of course, or at least most novels and most novelists feel that they do. And here is one, not so long after Villette, by a novelist who indeed great admirer of Charlotte Bronte, Charles Dickens, which seems almost to obey the conventions of Victorian fiction. You have to see what you think. So this is Great Expectations. Now in his 30s, our narrator, seems wrong to call him hero because he's acted by his own account so badly so often. But anyway, our narrator returns to the grounds of Miss Havisham's demolished home, Satis house, where he encounters the woman to whom he lost his heart decades earlier and who he's loved hopelessly ever since, Estella. Pip, our narrator, has heard that Estella's brutish husband, Bentley Drummle, is dead, kicked to death by a horse that he was mistreating. There is proper poetic justice for you. And she's a widow. They are both older, wiser, melancholy. Their meeting in the dusk is a reconciliation as they look back on the past. But you said to me, returned Estella very earnestly, God bless you, God forgive you. And if you could say that to me then, you will not hesitate to say that to me now. Now, when suffering has been stronger than all other teaching and has taught me to understand what your heart used to be. I have been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape. Be as considerate and good to me as you were, and tell me we are friends. We are friends, said I, rising and bending over her as she rose from the bench. And will continue friends apart, said Estella. I took her hand in mine, and we went out of the ruined place, and as the morning mists had risen long ago when I first left the forge, so the evening mists were rising now, and in all the broad expanse of tranquil light they showed to me, I saw no shadow of another parting from her. Sort of a happy ending. I saw no shadow of another parting from her. She hasn't said anything, but he, in that sort of double negative, seems to indicate to any reader receptive for a happy ending that they're never going to part. And it's certainly much nearer a happy ending than what Dickens originally wrote. When he first wrote the last instalment of Great Expectations, Drummle was dead, but Estella has remarried. She's married a Shropshire doctor. I think that is as blameless as you can get in the sort of Dickens world. She's absolutely not available. Pip meets her not in Kent, but in a street in London. She's in a carriage. He is accompanied by a child, little Pip, who's the son of Joe Gargery, who was his only sort of friend as a child and who's also his brother-in-law, and Biddy, whom after the death of Mrs. Joe Gargery marries. Biddy, the woman Pip could have married, the woman who actually loved Pip. So a very different situation, and this is the exchange. Estella speaks. Estella speaks. I am greatly changed, I know, but I thought you'd like to shake hands with Estella too, Pip. Lift up that pretty child and let me kiss it. She supposed the child, I think, to be my child. I was very glad afterwards to have had the interview, for in her face and in her voice and in her touch, she gave me the assurance that suffering had been stronger than Miss Havisham's teaching and had given her a heart to understand what my heart used to be. I think it's a wonderfully melancholy ending, allowing, and this is the crucial thing, Dickens, he's a genius with parentheses. Whenever he does something in brackets, he's doing something really extraordinary. And this is no exception. He allows not just for an unhappy ending, but he allows Pip and Estella to part on a misunderstanding. She thinks the child is his, and so she thinks, oh, he's married, he's happy, he's okay. But he's not married, he's not happy, emphatically, he's not okay. And Dickens left it like that. And more than one friend, but in particular his friend and fellow, though deeply mediocre novelist, Bulwer Lytton, told Dickens that his readers would not stand for it. They would be outraged. He must change it. And they've been getting happy endings for almost 30 years. They weren't going to put up with it. And Dickens was persuaded to comply. I have done it in as few words as possible, he said, and that's the ending, the original ending that you read, I read to you. A pity, I think, a kind of failure of nerve, you might say. But also, I mean, there is a genuine problem with Great Expectations about how to end it. I don't know if any of you are watching the current adaptation. Adaptation seems almost the wrong word for it. Transformation, let's say, on BBC. But I mean, it's a striking thing that every single one of the 13 film and TV adaptations of Great Expectations finds it necessary to change the ending. Even the wonderful David Lean film sort of changes the ending. Satis house, oh, it's not destroyed. Estella's living in it. Oh, in comes Pip. John Mills rips open the curtains, lets in the sunlight, and runs out hand in hand with her. Over and over again, the end gets changed. I have actually seen, because I saw an advanced copy of it, I have actually seen the last episode of the current BBC dramatisation. I can't tell you what's in it, but I can confide that he changes the ending. So, later novelists would actually mock this, I think, this sort of Victorian thing about a novel needing a happy ending, needing an ending where people get what they deserve, where good people are rewarded. And here's a mocker, Henry James. One would say that being good means representing virtuous and aspiring characters placed in prominent positions. Another would say that it depends for a happy ending on a distribution at the last of prizes, pensions, husbands, wives, babies, millions, appended paragraphs, and cheerful remarks. Henry James himself thought a great deal about endings and became the pioneer of what we've come to call and be used to in all sorts of narrative forms on the screen as well as on the page as the indeterminate ending. Here is the ending of his most famous novel, The Portrait of a Lady, as it first appeared. And many of you will have paperback copies, if they were purchased more than about a year ago, which are different from this. So what's happened, so this is in 1881, it was serialized and then it came out in a one-volume edition in 1882. Isabel Archer, the heroine, is married to the sadistic Gilbert Osmond. Against his wishes, she leaves their home in Italy to travel to England, where her cousin and confidant Ralph Touchett is dying of tuberculosis. After Ralph's death, which takes place in the last chapter, her former suitor, American like her, Caspar Goodwood, meets her in the garden of the Touchett's house, Garden Court, and tells her that he still loves her. He begs her to leave her husband for him. She can do it. They don't have to care what anybody thinks. They're American. They're rich. They can do it. He doesn't say those two things, but those are very, very important to why he feels he can say it. And they have a kiss, a passionate kiss, like lightning. And then she flees back into the house. 2 days later, Caspar goes to London to find her, but her friend Henrietta tells him that he is too late. She came here yesterday and spent the night, but this morning she started for Rome. Caspar Goodwood was not looking at her. His eyes were fastened on the doorstep. Oh, she started, he stammered, and without finishing his phrase or looking up, he turned away. Henrietta had come out, closing the door behind her, and now she put out her hand and grasped his arm. Look here, Mr. Goodwood, she said. Just you wait. On which he looked up at her. And that was the ending. Yeah, quite an ending. And we have to remember, indeterminate in lots of ways, because, of course, most importantly, Isabel is en route to Italy, back to her husband. Is she going back to the marriage? Is she going back to rescue his daughter Poppy, whom she loves, from him. What's going to happen? It's indeterminate, but evidently it was indeterminate in the wrong way. At least one contemporary review took this ending as implying that Isabel would leave her husband for Goodwood. And actually there's a great anecdote, which I think is fairly reliable, that soon after the publication of the novel, Henry James was at a dinner party and somebody said to him, oh, you know, great ending, I'm really pleased that Isabel and Caspar are going to get together. And he went, no. And anyway, he rewrote it. He rewrote the novel in many, many ways for the 1908 New York edition. This ending, well, this is the ending which, in fact, used to be the ending of the Penguin edition of The Portrait of a Lady, but it's recently been redone and it's reverted to the earlier edition. This is how it appeared in 1908 with Henry James's revisions. She came here yesterday and spent the night, but this morning she started for Rome. Caspar Goodwood was not looking at her. His eyes were fastened on the doorstep. Oh, she started? You notice he put a question mark in now. Oh, she started, he stammered, and without finishing his phrase or looking up, he stiffly averted himself. That's new. But he couldn't otherwise move. That's new. He is reacting in shock. He realizes it's all, hope is gone. Henrietta had come out, closing the door behind her, and now she put out her hand and grasped his arm. Look here, Mr. Goodwood, she said, just you wait. On which he looked up at her. That's where we ended, wasn't it? But now we end like this. But only to guess from her face with a revulsion that she simply meant he was young. She stood shining at him with that cheap comfort, and it added on the spot 30 years to his life. She walked him away with her, however, as if she had given him now the key to patience. It's difficult to know what to prefer. This seems, compared to the previous one, so explicit, so much pushing on us what the ending is telling us, because readers hadn't been intelligent enough to get it first time round. Yet that last sentence is wonderful, I think. She walked him away with her, however, as if she had given him now the key to patience. Sad to lose that, I think. It's a really tough ending in either version, and adaptations just cannot stomach it. Even Jane Campion's often engrossing film adaptation just flinches away from it. In this version, well, this is my experiment. Let's see if this works. This is how the Jane Campion film ends.
You can only for once listen to me. Why shouldn't we be happy? Why? Why, when it's here before us, when it's so easy? We can do absolutely as we please. To whom under the sun do we owe anything?
I beg you to go away.
Don't say that. Don't kill me.
In the book, it's high summer, but directors just love snow. Okay, that's not what Henry James wanted. Okay, a good film, and with its own indeterminacy of ending, of course. She turns back and looks into the snowy garden and what's she going to do? What's she going to do? But in the novel, of course, she has done something. She's gone back to her husband, and we just don't like that. That John Malkovich, no. So Jane Campion is loyal enough to James to produce her own kind of indeterminacy, but nothing like in the novel. And James himself comments with a little bit of pride, I think, on the uncertainty that he managed to generate amongst his readers. The obvious criticism, he's talking about the ending of The Portrait of a Lady. The obvious criticism, of course, will be that it's not finished, that I've not seen the heroine to the end of her situation, that I have left her en l'air. This is both true and false. The whole of anything is never told. You can only take what groups together. What I have done has that unity. It groups together. It's complete in itself, and the rest may be taken up or not later. The rest may be taken up or not later, as if he's going to write a sequel to it. Well, actually, other novelists have done. John Banville published a sequel to The Portrait of a Lady 5 years ago, Mrs. Osmond, which takes up the undetermined ending of Henry James. Here's an ending, because I thought somebody might ask me for a favourite ending. So I answered the question I asked myself and thought I might go back to the passage because there is a sort of circular motion here. This was the passage with which I ended the first of my Gresham lectures, nearly 3 years ago. And it seemed appropriate because, of course, one thing endings often do is go back to the beginnings of novels, like that Hilary Mantel ending. And it's a wonderful ending to Kazuo Ishiguro's novel Never Let Me Go, narrated by Kathy H., a human clone. In England in the 1990s, an alternative reality. And Kathy H., of course, has been bred like her fellow clones to provide internal organs for the rest of the population. She will eventually complete, that means her organs will be harvested and she will die. Meanwhile, she's a carer for others, and she drives around the country caring for those who have already begun donating. And she ends up one day somewhere in Norfolk. She has this idea Norfolk's the place where everything sort of washes up. And in this field in Norfolk, I was thinking about the rubbish, the flying plastic in the branches, the shoreline of the odd stuff caught along the fencing, and I half closed my eyes and imagined this was the spot where everything I'd ever lost since my childhood had washed up, and I was now standing here in front of it. And if I waited long enough, a tiny figure would appear on the horizon across the field and gradually get larger until I'd see it was Tommy, and he'd wave, maybe even call. The fantasy never got beyond that, or I didn't let it. And though the tears rolled down my face, I wasn't sobbing or out of control. I just waited a bit, then turned back to the car to drive off to wherever it was I was supposed to be. And that last utterly inelegant sentence is as good as Henry James in a different way. It's as good an ending of a 21st century novel as any I know. It fulfills all that's gone before with the resonance of its colloquial ordinariness. Waited a bit, wherever it was I was supposed to be. It completes a novel whose whole point is the inadequacy of its narrator. Kathy H. doesn't have the words to rebel against her cruel destiny. She accepts her fate, contravening all the conventions of sci-fi, much to the fury of many a sci-fi fan, and how well it shows that an unhappy ending can be just as pleasurable, just as satisfying as a happy one. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John. Rather unsurprisingly, you have preempted two of the questions online, your favourite and the saddest in the last one. Yeah, so can we have some questions from the audience, if anyone would like to ask one? Otherwise, I shall revert to the people who are watching online. What do you think of modern authors like George R.R. Martin, who seem to subvert the rules by killing everybody who might matter off all the way through the novel?
I'm not sure that's about ending, though. Yes, George R.R. Martin. I have actually read, surprisingly, for money, the first 4 volumes of The Chronicle of Fire and Ice, or whatever its actual name is in book form. And he does indeed kill off people, and that's one of his tricks, one of his skills in a way. But also, I would say, I talked at the beginning about sequence novels, roman fleuve. I think it's fairly clear that even if you're a fan of George R.R. Martin's writing, he's in trouble about how to end it. The TV series seemed to me in massive trouble about how to end it, and I think might be produced as an example of one of those. I don't really want to talk about Game of Thrones too much, but one of the examples in the minds of lots of fans of an ending which spoiled lots of the things that had gone before. I think lots of people felt that. But the TV adapters were trying to cope with what George R. R. Martin the problems he'd sort of created for himself writing these books. I think there's a gentleman there who'd like to... Isn't he still writing them, still wondering about how he's going to end it?
Hello, it's just a question. With the example you've got on the screen there, it's in first person, so it's a lot easier to create a sort of indeterminate ending. Would you say it's harder to do it when you write in third person as opposed to first?
So it's easier to... I lost some of what you said. In the first person, it's easier to create what, did you say? More indeterminate. Right, because unless the person dies, they're going to go off and do something else. I think that probably the problem is that in the 18th and 19th century, novels narrated in the third person generated a lot of expectations and conventions about how the author would, as it were, be there to wind things up for you, okay? So, of course, the author has decided what to do here, but the narrator author of much 18th and 19th century fiction became somebody who apportioned fates, as it were, told you everybody's destiny, and could do that, and was expected to do that. And I think that actually, for some 19th century readers, that made endings much more satisfactory, that it was more difficult for a first-person narration to tell you what had happened to all the other characters. And we know this in sort of, film and TV sometimes replicate it with funny sort of epilogues, or even before the titles at the end, they'll tell you what happened to some of the other characters. And it's a sort of reproduction of what happens at the end of, not just 19th century, it's all started by Henry Fielding in the 18th century. What has happened, though, I think, in the late 20th century, is that it's become very difficult, perhaps impossible, to write a novel with a sort of omniscient narrator. I mean, this is a bigger topic than just endings, but it shows in endings. And we will accept any kind of first-person narrator in literary fiction. And the more inarticulate, the better. And the more uncomprehending, the better. And the more hampered and hamstrung, the better. But it seems very difficult now to imagine a contemporary equivalent of George Eliot or Henry James, or even Thomas Hardy, actually. Novelists who would tell you at the end what, more or less what had happened to everybody. So I think our ideas of what's better and worse have changed.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, have you seen a tendency in unsatisfactory endings, like something that they always have that just, even whether they're happy or sad or, ambiguous an ending. Have you ever seen like themes that just, you're like, this is just a horrible ending?
Well, I can report one experience I had, which is a sort of practical thing about how people write novels. I've interviewed many novelists over the years and discovered some things about how many do it. And one year, many years, it was about 13, 14 years ago, maybe even longer, when I was a Booker Prize judge and I had to read 130 odd novels in that year. And I did notice something, which was quite a lot of novelists seemed to really know how they wanted to start a novel. Yeah? And then a few had already thought about how they were going to end it. And one practical difference between a good ending and a bad ending is, I think, simply that the good endings are ones which are encoded in the beginning, if you see what I mean. If you read how Dickens' working notes, with his later fiction, he knows where he's going, and so when you get there, you have an experience of a reader of course. But that relies on the novelist planning, I think.
So, I'm Martin Elliott. I'm currently the provost here, and I get the pleasure of saying a few words at the end of this. I hope I'm not the slimy, sinister Mr. Elliott, which you mentioned.
I think it's spelt differently.
I do hope so. Anyway, very sadly, this is the last of John's series of 9 lectures, as you heard. And it's been a tour de force, as far as I'm concerned. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. He's brought his considerable intellectual heft, but also his wonderful media-honed presentation skills, as we've heard again tonight.
Oh, they're honed.
They're well honed. And he's taken us from the beginnings of novel to tonight's endings. And along the way, he's considered crime, which we heard novelists cannot but relish, the supernatural, quoting from those wonderful Axon novels by Hilary Mantel, which I absolutely adore, and plotting, which came with its own spoiler alert because he told us what the plots were all the way through. And adultery, concluding that the old adultery plot may be irresistible. I think there's probably truth in all of those things. He's selected excellent writing, and it's been stunningly analysed, but he's also been a delight listening to him read so much, and I'm absolutely sure that an acting career is just around the corner. I also want to pay tribute to you, John's loyal audience, because without exception, we were commenting on it earlier, he's had the most searching, the most informed, and most of the most intelligent questions of pretty well any of the Gresham lecturers, and I hope he's found them suitably taxing. So on behalf of everyone at Gresham College, thank you for all your excellent lectures during this series, and for all you've brought to the college in other ways. We've much appreciated it. And as we hand you back to UCL to get on with your life, we hope we'll be able to welcome you back here in the future. And ladies and gentlemen, please thank Professor John Mullan in the usual way.
Thanks.